Good morning, America, North, South, and Central America. Good afternoon, Africa. Good evening and even good night to Asia and the Pacific. This is a warm welcome to all of you to this side event that will take place under the 20th session of the Permanent Forum. My name is Mattia Paia Galletti. I am the lead technical specialist for IFAD, responsible for Indigenous Peoples and Tribal Affairs. Today, I will be the moderator of this event. As a start, let me quickly give you a couple of housekeeping messages. Even though by now, I think everybody is quite familiar with the webinars. Anyhow, the first message is about interpretation. Feel free to select the audio channel down in the screen to have the language of your choice. We have interpretation in Spanish and French, in addition to English. And the second message is about the Q&A session that we will have. Because it's the format of a webinar, please use and write down in the Q&A window all the questions that you want to raise, also specifying which panelist you want the question to be addressed. So today we are here for a side event that normally we organize in connection with the Permanent Forum every time we carry out the global meeting of Indigenous Peoples Forum at IFAD. This Indigenous Peoples Forum, for those who are not yet familiar, is one of the two instruments included in the IFAD policy for engagement with Indigenous peoples. It was established in 2011, and it's aimed to be a permanent process of dialogue and consultations between Indigenous organizations and IFAD and governments. So every 2 years, we organize a global meeting, which is preceded by a series of regional consultations. That's what we did this time. But for the first time, we did it in a virtual modality. So we had regional consultations in Latin America, Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. We were able to reach out to more than 500 indigenous organizations. That was a record of participation, and the theme focused on the forum focused on the main theme of the value of indigenous food systems and the resilience in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. This year, we also celebrated the 10th anniversary of the forum, and we are going to start and show you a video that we have produced on this occasion. Before that, let me also quickly explain you the modality of this side event. We thought to organize this event in 2 phases, in 2 sections. The first one will be indeed to report back on the Indigenous Peoples Forum. We will have a number of panelists who are a member of the steering committee of the forum, and they will respond to a series of questions that we have pre-identified. The second part of the meeting will be about the Indigenous Peoples Assistance Facility, which is the second instrument included in our policy. And we wanted to report on the results achieved and on ideas about the way forward. We also wanted to showcase the value of this facility through the voices of those responsible for the implementation. So without further ado, let me start by sharing with you the video that we have prepared for the 10th anniversary of the forum.
We convened a brainstorming session on the side of the UN Permanent Forum in 2010 to listen to indigenous leaders on how to establish platform of dialogues where they could express their voices and support also our organizations in improving our work on the ground with indigenous people. So they told us what they wanted to see a forum at IFAD.
I am very optimistic. I'm in fact hoping that this process will be something that we can share and use with the other agencies. IFAD is the first one from what I know that is establishing a specific platform for Indigenous peoples that is going to be a direct interface with the highest level of decision making.
We think that it is high time that we define the way we engage with IFAD by having a forum that is driven and inclusive of Indigenous peoples representatives, and so that we can be able to define our destiny in collaboration with the IFAD staff.
Hace apenas 80 años, el primer líder de los pueblos indígenas llegó a Naciones Unidas y no le abrieron las puertas. Hoy, aquí en IFAD, venimos a dialogar con las máximas autoridades de esta institución. Han habido muchos cambios.
This is a partnership. You make commitments, we make commitments. So really what I would like to do is to applaud you. You've done this. This is terrific. Congratulations to you.
You involve Indigenous peoples, they can be able to tell you what are development trajectories that would respect their uniqueness and livelihoods. And therefore, it's very unique that IFAD has seen that and created a forum where they meet policymakers, influential decision makers. It makes a huge difference for them because they get the opportunity to engage.
We have been able to see that the senior management of IFAD really listened to our recommendations and to make changes at the regional and country levels. And I would say that the thing that makes me more proud is that I see more women and youth involvement.
And there have been some major decisions taken, like the Indigenous Peoples Assistance Facility, which provides more funds directly to Indigenous people. It has also provided the avenue wherein Indigenous peoples can talk to the relevant IFAD people to share what they think is good or not working well with the IFAD projects.
The big change that I expect to see in the next 10 years is that in IFAD's big operations, more Indigenous peoples that live in rural areas can be important actors in the development of IFAD projects at country level.
If we need to measure the results after a decade, we don't have to push to have Indigenous peoples express their voices, but Indigenous peoples are seen as an important component of the voices of IFAD's target groups.
IFAD has been among the UN agencies one of the good practices, if not the best. IFAD has institutionalized their partnership with Indigenous peoples, and it's wonderful that it's 10 years later you will be celebrating the 10 years of the Indigenous Peoples Forums. Very hearty, sincere congratulations to IFAD because they are doing a fabulous job in terms of their work with Indigenous peoples.
Ustedes tienen una gran responsabilidad. Yo espero que los espíritus de la selva nos protejan e iluminen para ayudarnos a poner en prácticas las decisiones adoptadas por el Foro de los Pueblos Indígenas en el FIDA. Muchas gracias.
We started with a seed 10 years ago. There is a plant, and we wish we will have a forest. Thank you.
here I am. So this is the introduction regarding the first part of today's event. Let me add that important deliverables of the Indigenous Peoples Forum are the synthesis of deliberation, which is presented in front of all member states of IFAD during the Governing Council, as well as a more operational document, which are the regional action plans discussed and agreed between indigenous organizations and our regional divisions. But now let's hear from our panelists about their expectations, their views about the Indigenous Peoples Forum. We feel committed to report on this because we are aware that this model of partnership is being considered by other organizations. So it's very important that all together we report on different stakeholder perspectives. The first one on our panel is Fulman Chowdhury, who is a member of the steering committee of the Indigenous Peoples Forum and is representing the permanent forum of Indigenous issues. Here's a quick introduction. Pullman belongs to the Taro community. At the moment, he serves as executive president of the Asian Indigenous International Network. And he also worked with UNESCO as a senior program coordination in Nepal. There are many other things about his CV, but because of the sake of time, I will just stop here. And rather, I will pose him a question. Dear Pullman, it would be great that if you, as a representative of the Permanent Forum, you could tell us something about how do you see the Indigenous Peoples Forum at IFAD as an instrument of engagement with Indigenous people. Please tell us whether you think it's meeting its purpose and whether does it introduce to advance Indigenous peoples' issues and rights according to the mandate of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Each panelist will have more or less 6 minutes. I will help you in managing time. Over to you, Pullman.
Thank you, Mattia. Do you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Yeah. Very, very good morning and namaste, everyone. Distinguished member of the steering committee, distinguished delegates, distinguished indigenous representative and global leaders, fellow participants, ladies and gentlemen. This is my great pleasure and delightful moment to be part of this wonderful meeting, speaking on behalf of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, as well as member of the steering committee at IFAD, addressing on IFAD and Indigenous Peoples Development Partners for an inclusive and sustainable paradigm shift organized by International Fund for Agriculture Development. For this special interaction, I extend my sincere gratitude, warmest welcome and solidarity to all of you having such opportunity as being a speaker with virtually. Of course, I'm really happy being here speaking on today's topic as we are under progress of 20th annual session of the Permanent Forum with the very special theme of peace, justice, and strong institution, the role of Indigenous people in implementing Sustainable Development Goal 16. Therefore, this is the time to be strong, presenting our efforts for better Indigenous peoples all. As I am representing in the steering committee from UN Permanent Forum, I would truly say the engagement of the Indigenous peoples at IFAD's intervention is really remarkable with upholding Indigenous peoples' rights, especially in the area of food sovereignty and improving their livelihood through agro enterprises. And we could claim that according to the 6th mandate area of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues is the spirit of work for the Indigenous people. Of course, we Indigenous people are the defenders of the earth, nature, biodiversity, and ecosystem. The Indigenous people's knowledge and technologies are environment friendly, which contribute to the sustainable development. In addition, in indigenous perspective, indigenous people development means to environment-friendly, sustainable development, which does not harm to the nature, biodiversity, resources, and ecosystem. The core value and the principle of the development in indigenous perspective are to respect, protect, and promote the nature, resources, biodiversity, and ecology. We wish the development that respect, recognize, and promotes the indigenous knowledge and technologies. The 2030 Global Agenda for Sustainable Development Goal has the core principle of none leaves behind and reach further behind. That means all sorts of development need to have inclusion and meaningful participation of the target group of peoples and communities. The development partnership has to be with the peoples for whom the development is targeted and with the people in whose land and territories the development is planned to take place. The approach of the development has to be human rights based. All sorts of the development have to reach direct to the targeted people and communities. From designing to completion of the development, indigenous people and local communities have to be well informed and meaningful participated. The free, prior, and informed consent of the indigenous people and local communities have to be guaranteed across the development process. The development should be for peace and justice rather than conflict and violation. Most of development these days are violating the human rights of the indigenous peoples and local communities. In the name of development, the indigenous land, resources, and territories are encroached and our indigenous people are displaced, victimized, harassed, detained, killed, and many more, which are serious human rights violations. Legal remedies and access to justice are also very challenging for indigenous people because indigenous people cannot afford the cost of the judicial process. Hence, the development partners who support to the development have to ensure and secure the inclusion and local communities. The human rights principle of the SDG have to be integrated in all sorts of development. The development approach has to be inclusive and adopt the sustainable paradigm. The stereo of the development centering of human rights without any free, prior, informed consent of the indigenous people and local communities may never bring the peace and justice. So in order to establish the harmony, peace, justice, and strong institution, there is a need of the inclusive and sustainable paradigm shift in all kinds of development initiative. So we also hope to hear from member state effective roadmap of implementation of the recommendation made by Permanent Forum, which are annually endorsed. This is now the opportunity for us to take action on driving state in fulfilling their international human rights obligation. So I firmly believe the meeting will be able to address the core indigenous issues that are connected with the sustainable development, justice, peace, prosperity around the globe. Thank you, Mattia. Over to you.
Thank you, Fulman, and thank you for staying in the time perfectly. And thank you for reporting back from the perspective of the Permanent Forum. In fact, you also added an important part of the value of the Indigenous Peoples Forum, which is the dialogue with the member states and governments. And now let me turn quickly to the second panelist of this panel, which is who is Margaret Tunda Lepore. She's also a member of the steering committee, and she's representing the indigenous youth from the Africa region. Tunda belongs to the Maasai peoples. She plays a key role in advocating for the preservation of the cultural practices in the Maasai community. And she's currently collaborating with Slow Food to conserve and promote the red Maasai sheep, which is a local breed. So the question, dear Tunda, is because of your membership with the Slow Food Youth Network, how do you see the contribution of indigenous youth in the Indigenous Peoples Forum? And since you are also following the preparation of the Food System Summit, if you have any views about that. Over to you, Tunde.
Thank you so much, Mattia. I don't know whether you can hear me. I'm somewhere today in my local town.
Loud and clear.
Thank you, thank you. So there could be some noise that will come, but I hope not much. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this side event. I'm very grateful and I greet you all. And Tasova Pogin, and good afternoon, good morning, evening, from wherever you're listening me from. The indigenous community setting has quite changed after in the last decades, like 10, 20 decades. A lot has changed in our villages, and our villages are characterized with many people. Initially, it was characterized with many people, including men, women, and the youth and children, where every age was linked to specific activities. For example, in my community, as a pastoralist community, young boys will be in the fields grazing, and the young girls will be helping their mothers with household chores like fetching firewood and water, and the young men will be with their fathers in the fields grazing. But today a lot has changed, and we have fewer people in the villages because some are in school, and many other young people have moved in search of jobs in the cities. And initially there was plenty of land for grazing and also tilling land, and the land was owned communally. Today, land has been fragmented in small pieces, and some taken by government projects and private sectors, land grabbing, forceful evictions, and extreme weather patterns and effects of COVID continue to aggravate this marginalization of indigenous communities. However, I am glad that I am here today and talking to you all, and had the opportunity as a young woman to contribute in conversations that are meant or geared towards preserving our culture, and more so preserving the food system and making sure that we have good food for the community and quality food for our families and our children and the generations to come, because whatever we are doing, we are not doing it just for ourselves. However, despite all these challenges, our elders have continued to instill our culture to us, the young generation, and ensure that the sustainability, continuation of culture through integration of knowledge and culture transfer. The involvement of young indigenous youth in different forums and discussions like this one, and dialogues and decision-making tables is very paramount in the efforts to ensure food security for all. Our goal and our mission is to have more indigenous youths involved in the process and to empower them and their communities to defend and promote and preserve their food heritage. As a member of the steering committee at IFAD and Slow Food advisory member of Slow Food International, representing indigenous people, I have seen a lot of joint initiatives and that have supported indigenous youth initiatives, and also their inclusion in different forums in promotion of biodiversity. And this has enabled and and is encouraging the youth to contribute towards raising awareness and appreciation of traditional products and craft, and their involvement also in continuity of the fight against harmful food production, food loss and waste, and other related challenges gives hope to that someday the goal of food security will be achieved. And most importantly, clean, good, and fair food for all. Indigenous and non-Indigenous youths have and sharing their knowledge and skill challenges like climate crisis, biodiversity loss, and hunger, and make
Tunda, we have a few connection problems. Can you switch off the video, perhaps? The situation should improve. Okay, I think we lost the Tunda, which is possible. We now know by experience that connectivity should not be taken as a granted, mainly in remote areas. So just for the sake of time, let's move on to the next speaker, to the next panelist, who is Yoon Mane from Cambodia. Mane has been as a member of the steering committee for a long time. She's an attorney. She is a former chair of the Cambodia Indigenous Youth Association. She served for the UNDP in the Regional Indigenous Peoples Program. And also she spent 2 years for the ILO as a program officer for Indigenous Peoples Project. This is among many other things. And so Mane would be very happy if you could tell us that just because of your long experience with IFAD, with the steering committee, how do you see the Indigenous Peoples Forum? Whether it's inclusive enough, whether the regional consultations that you were directly involved last year were able to reach out indigenous organizations. And of course, any suggestions about how we can do better in the future. Over to you, Mane.
Thank you, Mathieu. Good night from Cambodia. Good morning, good evening, sister, brother of Indigenous people from all over the world, and also dear Excellency and ladies and gentlemen. So first of all, I would like to express my appreciation to the IFAD, especially to the IFAD Indigenous People team for organizing this such important side event for the steering committee to sharing our experience and reflection on the 5th global meeting of Indigenous people at IFAD. Based on my experience being part of the Asia Indigenous People Forum steering committee at IFAD since 2017, generally I always feel very proud to the IFAD from the headquarters to the regional and also at the country office, especially to the IFAD Indigenous People team for the commitment for the fulfillment of inclusion of the indigenous people in the process, in order for indigenous people to guide it and to decide it in the process of organizing the forum. So this is very much appreciated for the IFAD hard working and dedication to serve the indigenous people, and especially for the wonderful preparation of the 5th Global Forum took place this year on the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th February through the visualized meeting. Even we are all facing a dramatic of the challenge from the COVID-19 pandemic. but we still able, to work, organize this forum. As Matthew mentioned, the forum have a series of, before the forum happening, we have a series of the regional consultation from Asia, from Latin America, from Africa, and all these have been reflected, the diversity of the perspective and the recommendation gathered from the indigenous people around the world. And the fifth global meeting was focused, as Matthew mentioned, this year is the value of indigenous food system resilient in the context of COVID pandemic. And this topic is very much linked to the need and the issue of indigenous people at the ground for more attention at all levels in order to improve our food system. And I can see that the forum it's make a lot of meaningful for indigenous people because we could express bring about our recommendation, our needs based on our reality from the ground to the IFAD, all the senior management and the highest the government council, and also to the other development partner for their hearing our voice on the issue of related to the food and production system. And also to show our commitment being part of indigenous people, how we will, ensuring the partnership with the IFAD and the others supporter as well. And also we had a very great opportunity to meet directly with the president of the IFAD and all the senior staff of the IFAD to express our directly concern and issue, and also, sharing our progress of building the partnership between the indigenous people and the IFAD. In addition, we also have a great message from our His Holiness Pope Francis, which showing his attention, and also he also stressed it and remarked it, call for attention to the indigenous people issue and rights to the other as well. This is very much powerful speech, to help indigenous people to raise our voice, because indigenous people alone, if we raise our voice, that is not enough. We need all the people around the world to help us to raise this voice as well. And also we could, showing our ritual ceremony, how is the important connected to our cultural identity, to our livelihood, also related to the food and to the environment, etc. And also we could, organize our Indigenous People Day, weeks, and film festival. And also in the forum, we also have been, able to participate in the Governance Council of IFAD. This is very much, appreciated and very grateful that we could, join with the Governance Council, with one of the highest authority of the IFAD, in order to deliver our synthesis of the deliberation. We show all our recommendation, our needs, our concern in order to address the issue. And also for this year, we have a very special session that provided award ceremony to the best practice project that funded by the IPA. So the discussion and the conclusion of the global meeting is to guide the partnership. It building more, guiding and strengthening more partnership between the indigenous people and IFAD every 2 years. And it start increasing, and it start progress more and more. And especially we have been, call for the support to IFAD on our the initiative to recognize and protection our rights to the holistic approach, value knowledge, strengthening our participation in IFAD project cycle, and the well-being, and also to indicate into the monitoring and evaluation, and ensure that the free, fair, or informed consent is effectively sought at the IFAD supported project. And in general, my conclusion, I see a lot of enhancement the indigenous people and the IFAD in line with the policy indigenous engagement with indigenous. You know, my experience when I say this, IFAD it's not just a talkative. IFAD it's not just, you know, talking without action. This is what my reflection, because all the results from you try to convert the policy into the practical action, you know, and also you convert the result from the global action, and also to ensure the benefit is really rich to the indigenous people. Example, I can see the enhancement of the partnership is in the operational guiding of the IFAD targeting the indigenous people, and also IFAD had developed the nutrition action plan, also attention for indigenous people. You have a new framework for implementation, transformational approach on mainstreaming team, also focus on indigenous. IFAD champion on indigenous people, and especially the pre-prior informed consent, it continues to be a key instrument in IFAD supported project and program. And you have also the strategic action that also, you know, counted indigenous people at all levels. And especially I really like the concrete result support IFAD country program and implement the IFADs at the ground, at the country level, and strengthening the capacity building, and also building the strategic partnership and resource mobilization for indigenous people. And also I found that IFAD have been, you know, supported indigenous people in order to joining on the supervision, yeah, and then also, you know, allow the indigenous people to join any strategy program at the country level, and especially building capacity of the IFADs and the project starts to engage with indigenous at the country level. And lastly, it's about your support of the indigenous people for self-driven development through the IPA, through the funded of the IPA. So therefore, in general, I found that the Indigenous Forum at IFAD, it has provided a concrete platform for the IFAD to institutionalize consultation and dialogue with the indigenous representative, as well as to you know, other key potential supporter in order to mobilize the support for indigenous people. And this forum is, you know, I hopeful it's one of the best model, at which I hope that the other partner around the world will building meaningful in partnership with indigenous people as much as IFAD's sample, in order to respect indigenous people knowledge, culture, and especially to reach the sustainable development goal. Yeah, and I hope that for, sorry, just last, I hope for if the next 2 year global forum meeting, through the visualized meeting, I hope that indigenous people will get more participation, because I reflect that this year meeting, if we get more participation from IFAD staff, but less the indigenous people, because we have some difficulty in access to internet, the language barrier, and also the different time. So thank you very much, Matthew. I would like to over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Manet, for such a comprehensive answer and reporting about all the activities that took place. And in fact, you are right, the connectivity was indeed a major challenge at this time. And certainly we all hope that the next forum, we will be able to be back in presence. You also mentioned one important point, which is our attempt as IFAD to translate good intentions into actual deliveries. And just to underline the fact that the regional action plans that I mentioned earlier are the instrument that allow us to get involved with the concrete deliverables, with concrete time frame. And this is the instrument that also allow us to monitor together with indigenous organizations the progress that being achieved, what are the areas where we need to improve, what are the areas where we have satisfaction. But that's a very important point. And thank you once again, Mane, for your answer. The last speaker on this panel is Jose Amadeo Martinez. Amadeo is a member of the steering committee from Latin America. Is a senior advisor of the Indigenous Council for Central America and a representative of the Salvadorian National Indigenous Coordinating Council. He has been working on national level policy issues. He belongs to the Lenca people. And for Amadeo, we have prepared this question. Just because of your experience in national policy dialogue, Amadeo, please tell us what do you think about what international actors like IFAD can do to facilitate the dialogue between indigenous peoples and governments. And of course, if there is anything we can do different, anything that we can do better. Over to you, Amadeo. Tienes la palabra. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Matías. Un saludo también a la doctora Mirna Cunningham, a los demás hermanas y hermanas del FIDA que se encuentran en estos momentos también conectadas y por supuesto a las representantes, tanto mujeres como hombres de los pueblos indígenas. Tú bien decías que el foro de los pueblos indígenas del FIDA este año se cumplen 10 años ya. Esto ha significado todo un trabajo, un esfuerzo desde las organizaciones, ¿verdad?, por ir incidiendo a nivel internacional. Y qué bien que ustedes como FIDA pues retomaron, ¿verdad?, han retomado todas esas propuestas que desde lo local, desde lo comunitario se han realizado. Esta plataforma permite pues tener este diálogo que es muy importante a nivel de la región. Decirte de que uno de los principales problemas que ha surgido en las consultas que hemos tenido a nivel regional como Latinoamérica, que se realizó en Mesoamérica, en el Caribe, la región andina, en Amazónica. Esto nos permitió tener un panorama amplio de cuáles son realmente esas situaciones que estamos viviendo los pueblos indígenas y que no nos han permitido avanzar en las propuestas y ser, como tú dices, cómo llevar a la práctica, pues, y con hechos más reales el trabajo del FIDA con los pueblos indígenas. Mira, una situación que le hemos venido diciendo tanto en los foros internacionales cuando nos hemos reído de forma presencial y así de forma virtual, es el hecho de cómo conectar al FIDA en lo nacional. Porque casi siempre estamos aquí nosotros sentados dialogando, pero no hay diálogo a nivel nacional. Eso sí es preocupante, mi hermano, porque entonces ahí realmente no vamos a traducir, no se van a traducir esas expectativas que nosotros tenemos como pueblos indígenas. Y te pongo el ejemplo de aquí El Salvador, pues comenzamos a tener un diálogo, pero ahorita no tenemos ni siquiera una mínima comunicación con los programas que está realizando el FIDA con los pueblos indígenas. Entonces eso nos lleva a mucha preocupación. Y te digo, ejemplo El Salvador, pero existen a nivel de la región casi la misma dinámica. Entonces, y eso nos lleva también a cómo realmente vamos a intercambiar esas buenas prácticas desde lo local. ¿Vea? ¿Cómo las vamos a intercambiar? ¿Vea? Porque no es solamente el venirlo a exponer aquí con el foro, sino que como en lo nacional también tenemos esas buenas experiencias y que nos permitan realmente fortalecernos. Y hoy lo hemos demostrado, pues en la situación esta apremiante que hemos tenido del COVID, la resiliencia misma que los pueblos indígenas hemos tenido, pues, y que gracias al apoyo, pues, del FIDA, gracias al apoyo del FIDA, pues, con los diferentes proyectos y programas, también hemos hecho frente a algunas situaciones que se han dado en el territorio. Esto nos lleva también, mi hermano y hermanas del FIDA, ¿cómo vamos a definir las oportunidades para fortalecer las buenas prácticas que promuevan soluciones sostenibles, así como los elementos necesarios para formular las estrategias regionales con el objetivo de aumentar el apoyo del FIDA en este respecto? Esto nos lleva a lo otro, al planteamiento que hacíamos de aquel fondo que decíamos que se pudiera dar de forma directa a las organizaciones indígenas. La dinámica política de Latinoamérica, en los países, nos ha llevado a un retroceso también en cuanto a los derechos ya ganados. ¿Qué quiero decir con esto? Que muchos gobiernos están haciendo caso omiso a esa reivindicación que tenemos nosotros los pueblos indígenas. ¿Verdad? Y ahí es cómo se desliga también el FIDA de los programas y proyectos para fortalecer la identidad cultural de los pueblos, las comunidades, ya en el territorio. Entonces, eso, ¿cómo vamos a hacerlo? Pues, es una pregunta también que yo la hago. Si está considerando el FIDA también de una forma más directa, no a través de los programas y proyectos que se hacen de los gobiernos, porque los gobiernos de forma discreta, ellos, los pueblos indígenas somos los que menos tenemos. También debemos evaluar los avances conseguidos en las aplicaciones de las políticas de actuación del FIDA en relación a los pueblos indígenas en cada uno de los países. O sea, que esto es muy importante también, porque ahí tendrían ustedes también, a través de sus pares en los países, un panorama más real de qué es realmente lo que está pasando en cada uno de nosotros. En las reuniones que tuvimos, si tú bien te acuerdas, que se llevó también y se planteó en el quinto foro que se ha realizado del FIDA hoy este año, las conclusiones, las recomendaciones que nosotros hicimos es en la política de actuación en relación a los pueblos indígenas del FIDA aprobado por la Junta Ejecutiva en septiembre del 2009. Se plantea la Asociación de los Pueblos Indígenas como una de las herramientas fundamentales para implementar sus principios de actuación, que es muy importante. Valoramos el Foro Global de Pueblos Indígenas con un proceso permanente de consulta y diálogo entre representantes de instituciones y organizaciones de pueblos indígenas. FIDA y gobierno, además, como un instrumento central para implementar plena y efectivamente la política de actuación en relación con los pueblos indígenas, siempre respetando el consentimiento libre, previo e informado, que es un principio para nosotros los pueblos indígenas. También una de las conclusiones es el proceso de preparación y de consulta regional han contribuido al conocimiento de mecanismos del FIDA en relación con los pueblos indígenas, lo cual permite la participación a nivel nacional, regional e internacional. Asimismo, en continuar la incidencia en cuanto a fortalecer los procesos a todo nivel, de fomentar los sistemas alimentarios indígenas, enfrentar los efectos negativos del cambio climático o disminuir las marcas de colonización y discriminación que todavía existen en los gobiernos y estados. Que esto está pasando ahorita, al menos en Latinoamérica, es una cuestión bien marcada. Se considera también que el FIDA está en proceso de descentralización hay mayores posibilidades de continuar y profundizar el diálogo y el trabajo coordinado con las estructuras organizativas nacionales y regionales de los pueblos indígenas para la incidencia a nivel regional, subregional y nacional. También estaba otra de las conclusiones, que es la Cumbre Mundial del Sistema Alimentario, convocada por el Secretario General de las Naciones Unidas a llevarse a cabo en el 2021, constituye una oportunidad para visibilizar los aportes de los pueblos indígenas para enfrentar el hambre, la situación agudizada en la pandemia. Por lo tanto, abordamos como un tema central del quinto Foro Global del FIDA, que se denominó el valor de los sistemas alimentarios indígenas, resiliencia en el contexto de la pandemia COVID-19. En base a las reuniones subregionales también, hermano, se hicieron otras recomendaciones, ¿verdad? Que mejorar la difusión de la política de actuación en relación con los pueblos indígenas del FIDA, así como las estrategias, instrumentos y procedimientos operativos del FIDA. ¿Esto por qué? Porque muchas veces nosotros conocemos acá estos niveles, pero cómo esto se traduce en lo comunitario, que la gente, cómo esa difusión se hace a las comunidades, a los territorios, para apropiarse, que la gente se apropie también de todos estos procesos. Y otra es organizar, apoyar y realizar diálogos políticos de alto nivel, ¿verdad? Entre el FIDA, los Estados miembros y pueblos indígenas, que nos permitan realmente tener diálogos de buena fe para la implementación de políticas, programas y proyectos sobre los sistemas agroalimentarios para garantizar la soberanía y la seguridad alimentaria y nutricional de los pueblos indígenas. Como ves, tenemos una buena relación nosotros a nivel de la región como pueblos indígenas y el FIDA. Esta plataforma nos ha permitido eso, excelente. Pero insistimos, vea, ¿cómo realmente vamos a hacer esta misma relación? Tenerla con sus pares a nivel nacional. Vea que eso nos va a permitir realmente fortalecernos ambos, tanto al FIDA como a los pueblos indígenas, y de esa manera las propuestas que se realizaron en el quinto foro, que se lleven a cabo, ¿verdad? Y que no vayan a quedar, ¿verdad? Como muchas veces, no digo que el FIDA lo hace, pero muchas veces los pueblos indígenas hemos hecho propuestas y recomendaciones y no han sido tomadas en cuenta. Y nosotros hemos demostrado en este año, más de un año de la pandemia, cómo los pueblos indígenas hemos hecho frente, a pesar de que seguimos invisibilizados y marginados por los gobiernos y los estados, cómo nosotros hemos realizado todo un trabajo, ¿verdad?, de diálogo, ¿verdad?, para poder, y la plataforma, también una plataforma que en esta época de pandemia la hicimos con el FILAC, ¿verdad?, que también es muy importante. Sí, hermano.
Un minuto más. Amadeo.
Bueno, yo concluyo con esto que les iba a decir, pero que con el FILAC también hemos realizado todo un trabajo, ¿verdad?, de incidencia, ¿verdad?, que nos ha permitido tener datos estadísticos, ¿verdad?, desde las comunidades para presentarlo a los gobiernos y que tengan ellos una herramienta también, pero vemos que seguimos invisibilizados, que es lo que te decía. Y es ahí donde nosotros tenemos confianza en que el FIDA va a jugar un papel muy importante para tener esos diálogos de buena fe que nos permitan tener también respuesta a todas estas recomendaciones que hemos realizado nosotros. Muchas gracias, abrazos para todas las hermanas y hermanos.
Muchísimas gracias, Amadeo. It was extremely clear how you presented both the challenges that are faced, but also what are the key success factors in order to have a dialogue effective. And also thank you for identifying what is the role of organizations like IFAD in facilitating this dialogue. We receive a couple of questions which are very much relevant to your statement, inviting us to speak about some concrete examples. I keep this question in the parking lot because we are running a little bit behind time, and rather move to the second part of the webinar, which relates to the to the Indigenous Peoples Assistance Facility. I think we give you a short presentation with few slides. I will give the floor to my colleague Carla to explain very briefly and quickly what this facility has been able to achieve so far. Over to you, Carla.
Thank you, Mattia. Thanks to all for being here today. So these are like the few highlights that we wanted to share with you before jumping to the panel. So what is the Indigenous Peoples Assistance Facility? That it's linking the grassroots Indigenous Peoples organizations with the international community. It finances small projects designed and implemented by Indigenous peoples. Overall, it is led by Indigenous peoples. The goal of the facility is to support the Indigenous people's self-driven development, building on their governance systems, cultures, identities, knowledge, and natural resources. It has three objectives that are the components of the facility. It's enhance the capacity, strengthen the IPs networks, and generate and share knowledge. The impact is to improve the livelihoods of Indigenous peoples, highlighting food security and nutrition, income generation, the management of natural resources, and traditional knowledge. So some of the IPAF results with 5 call for proposals. We have had already 159 projects with approximately 120,000 beneficiaries, with a financing of 5.1 million, mainly financed by IFAD, but we also have donors like Canada, Finland, Italy, Norway, the Christensen Fund, Philacta Malpais, Packard Foundation of GIA, and SIDA that is going to speak today here. We're very glad, and we are also very glad we see some of the people here connected, so thank you. There is this thing that we wanted to highlight is that in the past cycle of IPAF, for instance, only 5% of the received proposals received financing. So it is very low, and we are working to increase it. And yeah, we are very glad also with the donors that are joining the efforts and partnering with the facility. So the activities, and this is one of the highlights, of course, it's that are carried with a holistic approach, anchored in Indigenous peoples' cosmovisions. We also wanted to share with you about the decision-making systems and tools that IPAF has in place that are based on free, private, and informed consent. The IPAF board and the regional co-managers, for instance, the board is composed of representatives of Indigenous peoples organizations, and there are 3 regional Indigenous organizations responsible for the implementation, so that Samburu Women Trust, FIMI that we will hear today, and Tepteba. Then the process of selection, it's also led by Indigenous peoples, and we're very proud of that. We see here that the technical review is conducted by Indigenous experts that are hired by the regional organizations implementing IPAF, the ones that I just mentioned. And the final selection of the projects is made by the IPAF board. So I would leave it here, and thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Carla, for in a very few minutes explaining what are some of the most important features of IPAF. The ownership, the fact that we have a governing bodies composed of Indigenous leaders, we have the entire selection process in the hands of Indigenous organizations, and the fact that these small-scale projects are implemented directly by Indigenous organizations. The problem is that IPAF is successful. This may be a paradox, but the fact that last time we were able to finance only 5% of the proposals received is something that we are working on. And that's why we are so pleased to have the Swedish cooperation on board. And we have agreed to give Tove Goldman the possibility to share with us some opening remarks. Tove has been working for more than 20 years in international environment and development issues. She's been working both within the Swedish civil society, the Swedish Minister of Foreign Affairs, and now the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency. She represented Sweden at the boards of the Green Climate Fund and the Adaptation Fund, and she's currently the focal point for the support of SIDA with IPAF. So without further ado, Tove, I give you the floor. Thank you. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you so much, Matti, and excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for this opportunity to give some opening remarks. This is a very exciting side event, which has already proven, and I've learned so much about the forum, and now also with the progress that has been made with the Indigenous Peoples Assistance Facility. And this is really great news. But as you know, of course, there's a lot of challenges that remain, and we've got climate change, deforestation, destruction of soils, loss of biodiversity, and all these malpractices and hardships that are faced by millions of people around the world. And now on top of this, as we've heard, also the situation caused by the COVID-19 pandemic is really challenging for many. We're witnessing really adverse trends such as increasing food prices, the suspension of school meals in many parts of the world, restrictions on selling food in public urban places, and jobs at risk in many of the distribution chains. And also then, of course, negative impacts on incomes, and especially for rural households. And as we heard, Indigenous peoples are particularly at risk in these situations and face marginalization and hardships in many ways. But of course, they're also very, very extremely important actors with the knowledge and the solutions that we need for many of the long-term challenges that we face in agriculture and food systems. So this is why we need to build this strong partnership, and why we're so happy to be a very proud partner of IPAF, because we believe it's crucial both to support Indigenous people's own direct action and empowerment on the ground, and at the same time also draw upon these experiences to influence the larger political agenda in order to address the larger structural hurdles that many people face. And so the meaningful participation of Indigenous peoples and their organizations as development partners, we really believe that this can enhance the effectiveness both of IFAD and many other key actors in their operations, as we've already seen, but hopefully this will be even more increased and enhanced in the future, including in the upcoming Food System Summit. So by building also the capacity of Indigenous organizations for them to be able to access, for example, international climate and biodiversity funding from the Green Climate Fund or the Global Environment Facility, IFAP can also contribute to building an effective international finance architecture so that the resources can really be channeled to those who need it, and to ensure that no one is left behind. So here today, I'm really looking forward to hearing more about the experiences from Burundi, Nepal, Colombia, and other parts of Latin America. And so this is also very timely, because by hearing more about the experiences and really transforming this into strategic issues, we can see also how this can influence the development of IPAF's next call for proposals. So we also hope that more partners will join us in this endeavor. So thank you very much, and I wish you an inspiring and productive side event. So back to you, Matti. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tove. And thank you for all your support. The opening remarks were very effective. We cannot agree more. We will work together to get even more partners associated to IPAF. And without further ado, let's move to the panel. And the first speaker is Vital Bambanze. Vital is currently the director of the Unite for the Promotion of the Batwa People. He served as a senator of Burundi, representing the Batwa people in the Senate. He's representing the Permanent Forum in the IPAF board. He joined the IPAF board recently with a lot of support and I would say enthusiasm. So I'm very pleased to give him the floor. Over to you, Vital.
Merci, Mathia. Bonjour à tout le monde. Salutations à mes collègues autochtones et félicitations aux premiers intervenants qui ont donné beaucoup plus de lumière sur le travail d'IFIDA qui nous satisfait, je pense, au premier niveau. Personnellement, je suis content des activités de FIDA au niveau du Burundi et nous estimons que le travail fait en collaboration avec les peuples autochtones peut aboutir au respect de leurs droits les plus élémentaires. Parler de réalisation du mécanisme de financement des peuples autochtones par le FIDA, je dirais d'abord que c'est un aboutissement des efforts qui ont été concentrés par les peuples autochtones après plusieurs années de négociations pour la reconnaissance et la protection des droits des peuples autochtones. Et je voudrais, avant de continuer ma présentation ou mon intervention, d'abord rendre hommage à notre illustre disparu, à M. Estebancio du Panama, et j'adresse mes condoléances les plus sincères au peuple au peuple Punayala du Panama et aux autres peuples autochtones qui ont côtoyé M. Estebancio. Nous estimons que les efforts de nos illustres disparus vont toujours rester dans nos mémoires et nous allons poursuivre les actions tant que nous serons sur terre avant de les rejoindre dans les ancestrales de nos parents. Je voudrais rendre hommage aussi aux éminents intervenants qui ont soutenu les actions des peuples autochtones depuis le groupe de travail sur les populations autochtones, sur le groupe de travail sur le projet de déclaration des Nations Unies des peuples autochtones et d'autres mécanismes ou forums qui ont amené les organisations internationales dont le FIDA à comprendre que la collaboration avec les peuples autochtones n'est pas un cadeau, mais un sens de respect, c'est libre et égaux, et doivent jouir des mêmes libertés les plus élémentaires dans les États où ils se trouvent. Nous saluons des organisations particulièrement comme IFAD qui a depuis longtemps accompagné les peuples autochtones avant que même les autres systèmes internationaux, dont la Banque mondiale, l'Union européenne, puissent nous joindre pour appuyer les actions sur le terrain des peuples autochtones. Alors, c'est la question qui a été posée. Moi, je peux dire affirmativement que justement le mécanisme d'assistance des peuples autochtones est un des mécanismes qui montre que justement les peuples autochtones ont le droit du consentement libre préalable et parce que les interventions, surtout le mécanisme d'assistance, est géré et régi par les peuples autochtones qui sont sélectionnés et même par les membres de leur communauté. Et je salue les anciens membres de ce mécanisme qui m'ont aussi associé pour que je puisse être un membre de ce mécanisme. Parlant de la mise en œuvre de la Déclaration des Nations Unies sur les droits des peuples autochtones, nous pouvons dire que la déclaration est un des instruments internationaux sur les droits de peuple en général, les droits des peuples autochtones plutôt, mais il y a encore d'autres instruments qui étaient déjà là, les conventions et les traités, qui, je pense que pendant la mise en œuvre des programmes d'assistance au niveau des pays, poussent les peuples autochtones à comprendre qu'ils sont des citoyens à part entière et réclament leurs droits en passant par ce mécanisme. Parce que je pense qu'en parlant de l'adage de Gandhi, que ce que vous faites sans moi, ce que vous faites pour moi sans moi, vous ne le faites pas pour moi, bien confirmer que ce mécanisme qui est géré par les peuples autochtones vient pour que les peuples autochtones puissent aussi montrer leur capacité de gérer leurs affaires. On peut dire que les assistances qui ont été données depuis longtemps s'inspiraient beaucoup plus des aspirations des peuples autochtones au niveau culturel, au niveau économique et même au niveau politique pour la gestion de l'environnement, pour la gestion de leurs affaires, afin que les peuples autochtones jouissent entièrement de leurs droits en tant que citoyens à part entière dans leurs États. Nous pouvons dire que le mécanisme est positif, mais nous ne pouvons pas déplorer cependant certains défis qui montrent que la distribution des assistances n'a pas tenu beaucoup plus de déséquilibre régionaux plutôt, où il y a par exemple certains groupes autochtones ou certaines organisations autochtones qui ont beaucoup plus bénéficié de ce financement par rapport aux autres, et nous estimons qu'au cours de notre mandat, au cours de nos activités, nous allons essayer de corriger ces petites erreurs pour que tout le monde, tous les peuples autochtones jouissent au même pied d'égalité des avantages qui sont offerts par cette assistance, ce mécanisme d'assistance. J'aimerais aussi dire que ce financement devrait beaucoup plus
Une
nous
minute
faciliter
plus,
la collaboration.
Vital, s'il te plaît. Oui. On n'a pas une minute plus pour terminer?
Oui, je voulais terminer en disant je voudrais terminer en disant que son mécanisme devrait nous aider à collaborer et à négocier avec beaucoup plus les États afin que la mise en œuvre de grands projets financés par l'OFIDA au niveau des États puisse aussi atteindre les groupes les plus vulnérables dans leur pays où ils se trouvent, et surtout les peuples autochtones. Et j'estime que la mise en œuvre des objectifs de développement durable qui, et je pense, le principe de ces personnes derrière, devrait s'appuyer beaucoup plus sur l'assistance du mécanisme de financement pour les peuples autochtones et la collaboration avec les autres agences des Nations Unies pour emboîter le pas d'IFIDA devrait être une priorité pour que tout le monde jouisse de ses droits et libertés fondamentales dans l'état où il est. Merci, M. Mathia et les autres.
Merci beaucoup, Vital, and sorry, it's a difficult task to manage the time as a moderator. This is the thing I like the least. But thank you so much. You explained very well how IPAF also can fit in supporting the self-driven development of indigenous peoples in line with the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It's a very clear statement, and thank you so much for your support. We are running a bit of time. I'm afraid that we may not have enough time for the question and answer session. So sorry. So the next speaker is Pratima Gurung from Nepal. Pratima is an academic activist. She's currently General Secretary of Indigenous Persons with Disabilities. It's a global network. And she's also the president of the National Indigenous Disabled Women Association. Pratima has been influential in raising the voiceless of indigenous women, women with disabilities in Nepal and Asia, and she has contributed to the Disability National Direction Committee, which is formed by the Minister of Women, Children and Senior Citizens in Nepal. Pratima, we would be very happy if you could tell us about how IPAF can contribute to social inclusion and empowerment, to leave no one behind. We're asking you because we know about your success in influencing public policy on this importance of inclusive approaches. Over to you, Pratima.
Thank you, Mathia. First of all, I would like to thank all of you and also the organizer. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night from my country. So for me, it is an opportunity to speak on behalf of the marginalized groups in this side event, the Indigenous Peoples Development Partner for an Inclusive and Sustainable Paradigm Shift. So I will just begin my presentation with my own work experience. I used to work on Indigenous peoples in 2004, and now my work has shifted from Indigenous peoples to Indigenous women and Indigenous people with disabilities. And in that sense, we have realized and we have experienced that we need to have a common and a targeted approach. And in this regard, we realize that women and marginalized groups, including persons with disabilities, issues are very crucial. But at the same time, we also experiences that their voices are often heard. And in this regard, I would like to thank IFAD for having these initiatives to integrate the voices of women. We know that Indigenous value system and philosophy honors Indigenous women, and we are proud of it. Today, our struggles are not within us because we are not in the decision-making process in our country. Our brothers and sisters at the community level are still struggling for our basic human rights. And this is why we see that we lack a community leaders to advocate on our rights. Today, we are in a very critical juncture, the Indigenous women, as Indigenous women, because we want to lead not only the private sphere in the community that we live, but also we want to lead the country that we are from. So in this regard, our Indigenous values, systems, and philosophy are being colonized externally and internally by the non-dominant group. And in this regard, with the power is very much crucial, that who holds the power. And we are advocating right now for the paradigm shift, and we want to make a paradigm shift from a margin to the center by our leadership and meaningful participation. So our strategies need to be framed within and beyond us and in a very larger framework. At present, we are doing our advocacy within the women, person with disabilities, and Indigenous movement. But at the same time, we are also framing our Indigenous cultures, values, the systems, and the philosophy within our framework. And when it comes to the wider disability movement also, our struggles as Indigenous people have been also reflected and integrated in those discourses. So we are strategically working for this kind of approaches at the present context. So we realize that we want to be on the table making decisions for the issues that affects our daily lives. And we know if we look at the whole wider, broader policies and the framework at the national and at the international level, we see that the policies are still in a single, linear, and monolithic, homogeneous in nature. But the society that we live and the identity that we have is multiple and diverse. And we have challenges related with it. When it comes to Indigenous people and Indigenous women and other marginalized groups, we face structural and historical discrimination and challenges. And those structural and historical challenges and indirect discriminations that we face in our daily lives have not been reflected in the policies and the provisions that we have at this moment. So for me, I would see that IFAD and the IFAP policies, when we look at the IFAP policies, the tailored approach, the participatory grant-making approach, the community-driven approach with 9 fundamental guiding principles for reaching at the community and poor people have been reflected, and we appreciate the initiatives that has been forwarded. But I would like to emphasize today in this side event that it is time for us even to reflect and realize the work that we have so far done. So for me, in this regard, I would say that the work that the IFAD and IPAF have been doing at the global and the national level, it is time to think from those perspectives and see that have we reached to those marginalized groups? Have we ever thought from the lens that who are not in this room and what should be done to the people who are not in this room? So for me, I would see that it's time for us to realize, to rethink, and also to look from the lens of the most marginalized groups. So in this regard, I would like to recommend the social inclusion aspect has to be integrated. The term like social inclusion have to be defined in a very concrete manner. And in that regard, I would say that there would be a clear intersectional approach that is required to reach the most marginalized groups. And I would also like to highlight about the meaningful participation and enabling environment for all the marginalized groups. And by saying that, I would also like to highlight about the physical infrastructures and the accessible mode of communication that is required for indigenous people, including indigenous persons with disabilities. And the mental health and well-being component is one of the very crucial components that has to be integrated in the social inclusion manner. And apart from that, I would like to conclude by saying that there need to be a targeted and specific programs legally supporting for the most marginalized groups. And in that regard, I would also highlight an emphasis on the institutional strengthening support for the indigenous values and systems, because we know that our issues has really been crucial at the national level due to the forced assimilation. So for us, it is very important also to document and to research on the marginalized groups. The emerging issues like climate change is affecting our daily lives, and that is why these groups need to be in the center. And I would just leave behind here my discussion, and I would like to add that all the marginalized groups, including indigenous people and indigenous women, children, elder, and people with disabilities, should not be left behind in all the discussion and discourse of the IFAD, IFAF, and all the indigenous discourse at the global and the national level. I thank you for listening me. And if there is any questions and any queries, I would be happy to respond it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Fatima. I'm so happy that you are a member of the IPAF board. These are the pressure that we need to have. Never hesitate and never be shy on raising the bar. In fact, we should never be complacent with the results that we achieve. Whatever we have achieved, we should always be able to make an additional effort to think how we can do more and better. And I think your remarks were very clear, and we very much look forward to work with you since you joined the IPAF board very recently. Now, thinking about how to translate actions, how to make actions successful, the next speaker is one of the co-managers of IPAF. Ioannis Amador is responsible for the IPAF program in Latin America. She's from the Zenu people from northern coast of Colombia. Since 2009, she's been also the coordinator of the Seeds and IPAF projects and INI Fund for FIMI, which is the International Indigenous Women's Forum. The work of Ioannis, and in fact, I take this opportunity to thank Ioannis, like I'm thanking Ruby, I'm thanking Jackie from Asia and Africa, is the work that can really make the difference. And Ioannis, we would like to ask you, based on your experience, whether you could share with us some of the results that have been achieved in the region. In particular, in terms of strengthening the Indigenous Peoples Network and how to link them with the global Indigenous Peoples movement. This is also another important strategic part of the IPAF program. Over to you, Ioannis. Tienes la palabra.
Hola, buen día, ¿me escuchan?
Sí, muy bien y muy claro.
Ok, gracias Matías por la palabra. Saludos cordiales a todas y todos los asistentes. Primero que todo, quiero agradecerles por la invitación para acompañarles en este espacio. Antes de responder la pregunta, sí me gustaría compartirle que el Foro Internacional de Mujeres Indígenas, FIMI, es una red global que articula organizaciones de mujeres indígenas de las diversas regiones. Es socio estratégico del IPAF desde el año 2011 por la región de América Latina y el Caribe. A fin de responder la pregunta planteada, sí me gustaría comentarles que la voy a responder en dos momentos. Un primer momento, perdón, es que escucho a la intérprete. Ok.
You can be in the Spanish channel, Yanis.
Un primer momento va a ser los resultados específicos que hemos obtenido con los proyectos IPAF, y un segundo momento va a ser los resultados generales que hemos obtenido a través de FIMI. Entonces, en este tercer ciclo IPAF-FIMI se ha fortalecido a 1.488 beneficiarios directos e indirectos a 21.243, en donde nuestras socias han sido mujeres, hombres, jóvenes, niños, niñas, adultas y adultos mayores. También se han impartido capacitaciones a las organizaciones socias, contribuyendo así a su fortalecimiento institucional, brindándole las herramientas necesarias para un mejor desenvolvimiento en la búsqueda de los recursos. Este fortalecimiento institucional a las organizaciones ha permitido que se fortalezcan y crean estrategias sólidas para que puedan acceder a otro tipo de recursos. Por ejemplo, con nuestro aliado Paguanca, las organizaciones han tenido la oportunidad de poder obtener recursos gracias a su buena implementación y a su proyecto innovador. También la recuperación de técnicas ancestrales de economía comunitaria, desde las cuales se revitaliza el buen vivir de los pueblos indígenas. Asimismo, se ha promovido la transmisión de saberes intergeneracionales en cuanto a tradiciones, cultura, medicina y cosmovisión de los pueblos indígenas. Un valor agregado también que como FIMI, socio implementador por América Latina, es que establecemos sinergia entre programas de FIMI. Dentro de FIMI tenemos 4 programas. Entonces lo que hacemos es no solo limitarnos al apoyo financiero, sino que vamos mucho más allá. Escalamos oportunidades a las organizaciones que están implementando como socio implementador de IPAF. Ejemplos, a través de la Escuela Global de Liderazgo, 2 mujeres se han vinculado al proceso de formación en este tercer ciclo. La compañera Inmaculata de Guyana, y la compañera Aileen de la Organización de Argentina. También a través de Liderando desde el Sur, la agrupación Mapuche Cayón de Argentina está ejecutando un proyecto a la par que está ejecutando el proyecto de IPAF, y desde Incidencia y Participación Política, una participante ha sido vinculada a participar en los espacios de toma de decisiones. A nivel de resultados globales, tenemos que día a día FIMI está contribuyendo al fortalecimiento de las organizaciones y del movimiento indígena global. Por eso, a través de nuestros 4 programas impulsamos iniciativas como, por ejemplo, se han realizado reuniones regionales entre socias de FIMI y no socias para facilitar el aprendizaje y el intercambio de experiencias vinculada a la ejecución de proyectos y el trabajo de ampliación de la red a nivel global. También invitamos a mujeres indígenas líderes para retroalimentar documentos de incidencia política, principalmente en el marco de la conferencia, en el marco de la Comisión Jurídica y Social de la Mujer, de tal forma que tendemos puentes entre acciones de lo local a lo global. En los procesos de formación de FIMI, las líderes indígenas se vinculan con otras organizaciones de la región, así como de otras áreas socioculturales, creando redes y sumándose pues, a las ya existentes. Desde FIMI lanzamos convocatorias para las organizaciones de mujeres indígenas de las diferentes regiones. Por ejemplo, ahorita hace poco, en marzo 31, cerramos la convocatoria de proyectos semillas que va dirigida a organizaciones de base. También en junio, a través del programa Liderando desde el Sur, tenemos pensado lanzar otra convocatoria. Esta es mucho más amplia y va dirigida tanto a organizaciones pequeñas, medianas y grandes. También tenemos reuniones con las redes. Al ser FIMI una red de redes, pues siempre estamos vinculadas con las redes, informándoles qué hacemos, qué es lo que hacemos día a día, cómo lo hacemos y cómo ellas pueden involucrarse en el trabajo también que hace FIMI para mejorar. Pero creo que también uno de los grandes resultados que hemos obtenido es que a raíz de todo este trabajo que realizamos a nivel local, nacional, regional y global, es que hemos conformado una gran familia FIMI. Y esta gran familia FIMI se ha hecho realidad a través de la reciprocidad que tenemos es decir, que no solo como FIMI somos ese donante que da recursos, sino que va mucho más allá, da recursos materiales, da recursos humanos, y que vemos a nuestras socias no solo como aquellas que reciben y que queda hasta ahí, no, como FIMI también recibimos de ellas para mejorar día a día. Gracias.
Thank you. Muchas gracias, Ioannis. Thank you so much. In fact, it was very useful, your intervention. We listened before to Tunda, which unfortunately we had lost her for the last few minutes of her intervention. She's a member also of another network, the Slow Food Youth Network. So it's very important that we also retain this perspective, the fact that even if IPAF projects are small scale, whatever they do needs to be linked up to network, to regional and global activities, to have the opportunity not only to mobilize more support and more partnership, but really to make sure that the results achieved are known. And in this regard, the last speaker is my dearest colleague, Klaus Reiner, who can tell us about how the IPAF project can be replicated in the context of the IFAD larger projects. He will tell us about this. Klaus has been working with IFAD both in Africa division, in Latin America, and now he's the country director and head of the South-South Triangular Cooperation and Knowledge Center in Brazil. And without further ado, it's over to you, dear Klaus.
Many thanks, Mattia, and all the others who are here. This is a really pleasant event, talking about the things that matter and how we can improve them. So I'm very happy to be part of this. And I really like the question, because that's been at the heart of what I was intending or trying to do in many instances, linking the IPAF funded projects to IFAD's larger projects, to its mainstay loan funded projects implemented by governments. And that's already a big difference that we've got right there. The IPAF projects are implemented by small organizations of indigenous peoples, and the larger IFAD loan projects are always implemented by governments, the recipients of the IFAD funding. And there I think we have a big challenge ahead, and that lies in the fact that very often, well, let me say it frankly, many of my colleagues and also the partners in countries are not really taking the IPAF projects with all their potential. They are concentrating, of course, their work, with all due respect, on the activities that they have to do, and this is their main activities are, of course, the general IFAD projects. But I think the great potential of IPAF projects is overlooked in many cases, and that is the great potential of opening new avenues, of showing new activities, and also opening the eyes to our partners. So I think in making, in creating the IPAF portfolio, it's very important to consider this strategic dimension of IPAF, to make the indigenous populations visible, to demonstrate viability of certain activities. And that, for example, is in the inclusion of technical activities which which go beyond the traditional approach of social investments. Very often projects with indigenous communities work on water access, work on health and education, and the IFAD type projects are very much focused on productive investments, on income generation, and very much responding to often communicated need of indigenous communities. And I think the viability of these activities is very high. So it's important to show with IPAF projects that these types of investments also do work. They have actually much larger returns than regular IFAD supported projects, because indigenous communities are so marginalized and often so poor that any type of productive investment you do with them has a great makes a great change. And then I think it's very important to take the projects out of their isolation, basically increasing the visibility to the governments and to other partners, possibly by linking the supervision which IFAD does for its regular projects also to the supervision of EPAF projects. Obviously, there are at the moment some logistical difficulties. No physical supervision missions are taking place. Everything is virtual, but that also opens new avenues, new opportunities, which I think we can very much build upon. I have a very nice example where this link worked very well in Rwanda with the Batwa community there. There was an EPAF project that was working on investments with them, investments that go beyond pottery and beyond traditional activities. And we shared these results with government, and government that is normally very hesitant to work with the Batwa saw the opportunities and included activities in a regular IFAD funded project. And I think that is an eye-opener it has been an eye-opener to very many partners there. And I think it was a very good use of an EPAF investment, which is a tiny investment compared to the investments that IFAD is normally making. So we're talking about $50,000 for an EPAF project, and in a regular EPAF project we have normally an investment by IFAD of, let's say, around 20 million. So that shows you the scaling up potential. And I would also like to echo the voices of my friend Amedeo, who just now said there's no dialogue with national governments. I think that's exactly the problem. We need to really address that dialogue with governments, and we need to increase the visibility of these projects with government partners. Then I think that the knowledge management dimension of EPAF projects is really important. It's part of the objectives, but I think it's not used as well as it could be. We need to make sure that the experiences are well documented, that these experiences are shared, and we need to bring that into the general forums that we have on rural development. I think there's a big potential there. And then maybe a few suggestions for the future, maybe for the next round of EPAF projects. I think the strategic selection of projects could also take into consideration proximity to loan-funded EPAF projects, could include innovative and strategic elements, such as elements that EPAF is normally working on. If we think of, for example, the important work that EPAF is doing at the moment on climate change investments, we do know that indigenous peoples are the best guardians of natural resources, of the rainforest, of biodiversity. So EPAF projects could very well pave the way for investment opportunities, and then also think of the scaling up potential. With that, I would like to close. Let me just say at the end that I really think EPAF is a fantastic institution within IFAD, and it really deserves much more attention. And I think there's much more potential than is exploited of that small facility at the moment. Many thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Klaus. For some reason, sometimes the mic goes off. So thank you so much, Klaus, for explaining so well the potential of EPAF. The fact that being small scale is not a handicap. Small is beautiful when it comes to development. And also you cover all the other aspects, linking the results to knowledge, linking knowledge to policy engagement. And thanks a lot for all the suggestions. In fact, let me take the opportunity to thank all the panelists for coming up with good suggestions that we will retain while planning the next cycle of EPAF projects. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I feel guilty for the questions that we received. There were some interesting ones related to the policy issues. There was one addressed to Vital, but we promise you that we will follow up on this question and we will take the question to the destinataries. And so in closing, last but not least, we have Mirna Cunningham. Mirna has been basically the driver of so many activities not only with IFAD. In IFAD, she's the chairperson of the steering committee of the Indigenous Peoples Forum, and she is also a member of the IPAF board. But Mirna is also currently president of the Center for Indigenous Peoples Autonomy, the CATPI, the chair of the Pawanka Fund, the Tenure Facility. She is the president of FILAC. Frankly speaking, I don't know how Mirna is able to do all these things. And I really hope that one day she will be able to teach us how she can do it. Anyhow, Mirna, I think nobody better than you can come to a closing of this side event, identifying some key messages that we can take home that will enable us to continue our job and to do our job better. Mirna, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mattia. Also, I greet all of you in the language of my people, the Miskito people of Nicaragua. This partnership that we have been able to build between IFAD and Indigenous peoples is a concrete way of implementing the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The UN Declaration calls for UN agencies, entities, programs to really build a link of cooperation based on good faith. It doesn't say the good faith, but I have to say that it's based on the good faith between Indigenous peoples and these agencies. Today, this event has been reflecting on what we have been able to achieve in more than 10 years of relation. And I would say that we started this partnership with IFAD doing concrete activities. The first thing that we did, we jointly assessed some of IFAD big projects to identify how IFAD was really approaching the work in the rural areas with the poor, but addressing Indigenous people's issues. From those lessons that we learned from that joint assessment, we work on the policy. The policy that IFAD approved to work with Indigenous peoples. Now, I would say that IFAD has set in place a set of instruments based on that policy. The first is the forum. And although the forum gathers Indigenous peoples from the different regions every 2 years, it is a process. Because we know we have regional action plans and we meet with the regional coordinators to follow up on these regional action plans. And we organize preparatory sessions, regional preparatory sessions before we come to the global meeting. So it is a process through all the 2 years. But I would say the other instrument is IPAF. And you have heard about IPAF and the good things that we are doing with IPAF. I would say the main lesson that we have learned with IPAF is this partnership involving regional organizations that administrate those resources, and that increases the potential of those organizations, but it also supports building network between the recipients of IPAF grants with these regional networks, as Johannes have explained to us. But there are other instruments that IFAD have put in place, the environmental standards and the procedure of inviting Indigenous peoples members to monitoring, designing, evaluating these big programs. This also helped to increase the technical capacity of Indigenous leaders in different parts of the world. We have also worked together on national dialogues. Just a week ago, Indigenous peoples from Paraguay, after 6 years of working together with the government, were able to present to the president of Paraguay the National Action Plan. A national action plan that we started with a small support from IFAD in 2014. And this is another instrument that Indigenous peoples have in a very complicated context like Paraguay to continue pressuring for their rights. We have, let's say, come together during these 10 years. We have advanced and we have learned great lessons. And I would say the first lessons is these should be, it has to be long-term, respectful relation. It cannot be short-term. It takes years to build trust. It takes years to learn to decolonize relation between big institutions like IFAD and Indigenous peoples. The second lesson is that we have to be in the driving seat. If Indigenous peoples are not in the driving seat, someone else is deciding for us. And as Frank Roy always says, if we are not on the table, we are in the menu. We do not want to be in the menu. We want to be in the kitchen preparing the food. So we have to be in the driving seat. And that is something that we have learned with IFAD. The other thing that we have learned is that we have very good relation with IFAD staff, global, regional, but we need to participate in the decision bodies. That's why the meeting with the governing council and the periodic meeting with the president and the senior staff is important. We have to participate in meeting with decision bodies. And the combination of resources is another lesson. How to combine what we are doing with IPAF, with Slow Food, with FEMI, with other resources. And as Klaus said, we still have to work very hard to influence the big operations. But this has to do with our capacity to negotiate in our countries with our government. So that's why the participation in COSOP is something that we are trying to promote more and more. We have to be there when the government is negotiating the strategic framework with IFAD, because if not, we come late to the discussion. So this is something that we're trying to promote in complicated countries like Brazil, for example. But we understand that if we do not do that in that phase, it is much more difficult to come in a later phase. We have a good policy. The policy that IFAD has put in place is very good. And it just needs more appropriation by IFAD staff. And of course, when there's rotation of IFAD staff, we have to come back and start all over again. And that's why the national dialogue sometimes is a little more complicated, because we have rotation in governments and we have rotation in IFAD staff. So this require Indigenous peoples, two organizations to start at the beginning. We need to continue building this partnership, this good practice between IFAD and Indigenous peoples. We need to, as Pratima reminds us, to be more and more inclusive. I'm happy that Pratima is part of IPAF board, and I'm happy to that we can really, as I said, this partnership has been built on doing things together. So I think IPAF next call that we are preparing will be another opportunity to continue advancing in intersection to continue advancing in relating with other funders and big funds like the Green Climate Fund, but it will also be more and more opportunity to continue this dialogue. Everything that we have done, it has been because we are practicing respectful dialogue between IFAD and Indigenous peoples. So thank you for being part of this success story, because this is a success story. And I hope UN agencies can learn from this experience. So we have to share it more and more. Thank you, Matthias.
Thank you, Mirna. Thank you, Mirna. We are more than happy to continue this success story. We are more than engaged. We are more than motivated. And thanks to the steering committee, thanks to your presence, thanks to Amadeo, Vital, all Pullman, all the members of the steering committee, it will be in a way easy for us to have you in the driving seat. If you give us guidance and at the same time pressure, and without a respectless relationship, but with a respectful relationship, always inviting us to do better. This is exactly what the best conditions for a successful partnership are about. I think, and now I'm talking to all those who followed this event, I think and I hope that we were able to give you and meet the objectives of this session, to report back on the achievements and the dialogue during the Indigenous Peoples Forum, and to showcase some of the results of IPAF. These are the two dimensions of our work where we want to continue to progress. My last point is easy, which is to thank all those who contributed to make these side events. Thanks to the interpreters who have extended the period of this side event. The staff here with me, Paola, Carla, Lorenzo, all the technical staff, and mainly the panelists who have contributed with very effective statements. And thanks to all those who watch us. So see you soon. Let's be in touch. Stay safe, stay well.